Hello children, and welcome to today's English class. Hope you all are safe, happy and healthy at home and are spending quality time with your parents, at the same time learning a lot. In the previous class, we had tried to understand the first chapter of your prose textbook, A Letter to God. We also tried to understand the character and also the difficult words and their meanings. And we also tried to comprehend the lesson and try to understand the various ideas presented in the lesson. Today, I'll be teaching you poetry. Poems have been included in your syllabus in order to develop in you the skills of appreciating the poem, to develop your imagination skills, to develop your creative skills, to appreciate the themes and ideas presented in the poem, and also for you to develop the skills of writing your own poems. There is no doubt that children enjoy poems, and especially when the poets try to include various themes related to nature, adventures, and also when the poets try to include different styles of writing and they also include different figures of speech. In that case, the poems become more interesting and you enjoy them. Before we move to the first two poems in your prose textbook, both of them have been written by Robert Frost. Robert Frost is a nature poet, and at the same time he tries to bring in the various aspects of nature into our lives. He tries to relate the various agents of nature to our day-to-day life, and so the poems become more interesting. So before moving on to the poems, both the poems are too small, and so we'll try to understand both of them today. But before we move on to the poems, let's try to understand the different figures of speech which are used by the poets to make the poem more interesting. The first figure of speech which we are going to discuss today is simile. A simile is a comparison between two unlike things using the words like or as. For example, as white as snow, as wise as an owl, like a pearl in the ocean. The poets or the writer use simile to compare things using like or as. Metaphor. A metaphor is again a comparison between two unlike things or ideas, but without the use of like or as. For example, the world is a stage. Here it means that the world is like a stage, but without the use of like, it is clear. So the world is a stage. She's a night owl. He was a lion in the battlefield. That means he fought like a lion in the battlefield. But even without the use of like or as, it is clear to us. Therefore, the metaphor is a figure of speech where comparison takes place between two things without the use of like or as. Alliteration. Alliteration is a repetition of the beginning sounds of words in a line. For example, she sells seashells on the seashore. So the sound sh and s has been repeated in one single line. She sells seashells on the seashore. S and sh sound has been repeated. Nick needed new notebooks. The sound n has been repeated. Walter wondered where Winnie was. The sound v has been repeated. In a single line, when the same sounds, letters having same sounds are repeated, is known as alliteration. Personification. Personification is giving human qualities to non-living things or inanimate things or ideas. For example, the flowers nodded, the snowflakes danced, the thunder grumbled. So all these things have been given life as though they are behaving like human beings. They are nodding, dancing and grumbling. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a term for a word that sounds like what it is describing. For example, buzz, whoosh and click. Or you can also say the sound of the feet, tapping sound of the feet, the jingles of a bell. So the words which convey particular sounds is known as onomatopoeia. Repetition. When words are repeated in a line, it is known as repetition. For example, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. Here in this line, the word water has been repeated. And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Here, the word miles and sleep and before and go have been repeated. These are the lines from the famous poem of Robert Frost again. Refrain. When a particular line is repeated in a poem, it is known as refrain. For example, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep. Here, the lines and miles to go before I sleep have been repeated. So, the line which is repeated conveys the theme of the poem. The theme of the poem is being given importance by repeating the line. For men may come and men may go, but I go on forever. This is from the poem Brook, and here the mortality of human beings and the immortality of the river or the brook has been highlighted. So this line has been repeated in the poem. So when a particular line is repeated in a poem, it is known as refrain. Oxymoron. An oxymoron is a figure of speech where two words which have contradictory meanings are used together or opposite meanings. Small, crowd. We are saying small and then we are also saying crowd. So two opposite words, they are used together. Little, giant. Little giant. How can a giant be little? So but still it is a figure of speech and we use these words together. Old news. So two contradictory words are used together is known as oxymoron. Imagery. Imagery makes use of particular words that create visual representation of ideas in our minds. The word imagery is associated with mental pictures. When you read a particular line or a particular word, the picture comes to your mind. It was dark and dim in the forest. The words dark and dim are visual images. The fresh and juicy orange is very cold and sweet. Juicy and sweet, when associated with oranges, have an effect on our sense of taste or gustatory sense. So images are formed in our mind when we read particular lines or words of a poem. Irony. Irony is a figure of speech in which words are used in such a way that their intended meaning is different from the actual meaning of the words. It's a difference between the appearance and reality. For example, water, water everywhere, and all the boats did shrink, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Here, this is from the poem The Ancient Mariner, where the ship got stuck in the middle of the sea and the boats were shrinking and they were surrounded with water, but they did not have a drop of water to drink. So that is the irony. Children, we had discussed while we were discussing a letter to God, what was the irony in the story? That the post office people after having helped Lencho, was being blamed by him as a bunch of crooks and as having cheated him. He had trust in God but not in the post office people. That was the irony. The people who helped were being blamed. Let's move to the first poem, Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree. Let's look at the difficult word if you have any. Shook means to shake. Hemlock is a poisonous tree with white flowers. Now, here, due to some unknown reasons, the poet had a terrible day. He was in a bad mood and therefore he was walking along the trees, and when he came near the tree which has been mentioned in the poem here, that is the hemlock tree. Hemlock tree, as I told you, is a poisonous tree. It's not considered very good. As I told you, the poet was in a bad mood that day. So when he came under this hemlock tree, what happened? A crow. Maybe he was sitting on the tree, or maybe he was trying to fly away from the tree. So he shook the branches and dust of snow fell on the poet. The moment the dust of snow fell on the poet, the poet's mood suddenly changed. There was a sudden change in the poet's mood, and thereafter his whole day became different for him. Till now his mood was bad and he was having a terrible day, but as he came under this hemlock tree and the dust of snow fell on him, his mood changed instantly, and it changed the whole day for him. Now let's move to the second stanza of the poem. Has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Here let's see the meaning of rued. It means held in regret. Let's go back to the stanza. As I told you, the poet was in a bad mood and the crow shook some dust of snow, that is very small particles of snow, on his body, and suddenly he felt fresh and his mood was changed, and the whole day became a changed day for him. Now the poet says it changed his mood and his heart had a fresh feeling. It was something very thrilling for him, and saved some part of a day I had rued. That means the day which was terrible for him because of this bad mood now changed. Entirely his mood was changed, and also his day became totally different for him. So the poet expresses his feeling of being in the lap of nature, though the crow and the hemlock tree are, negative forces. They are considered as negative references. They're considered as bringers of sadness and gloomy feelings. But still, here the poet tells us that, sometimes he has so beautifully put it that sometimes even sad things can be a blessing for us. So we don't know how the nature is going to bless us, and therefore we need to be ready to accept in whatever way the nature blesses us. So here what we need to ponder is, the poet has used the bird crow. Normally what happens in poems, we read about sparrows, about nightingale, and about peacocks, beautiful birds and birds with beautiful voice, and here the poet has used the bird crow. and there are so many beautiful trees in the nature, but the poet has chosen the hemlock tree, which is poisonous, just to give us the message that even the negative agents of nature can bring joy and happiness to us. So these two negative agents have changed the poet's mood, they brought happiness for him, and they made his day. They changed his day for him. They changed his mood. And that is what the poet is expressing through this very small poem. Now let's try to look at some of the literary devices used by the poet. The rhyme scheme of the poem is AB, AB, CD, CD. I'll be discussing with you how to find out the rhyme scheme after we discuss these literary devices. Alliteration. I told you what is an alliteration. The occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. In one line, the repetition of the same sounds. Now, the alliteration from the poem which we just read are has given my heart, has, her sound, has, heart, right? So, see, H has been written in bold there, has given my heart, and saved some part. In the second line, saved some, sir, sir. The sound sir in saved and the sound sir in some. So that is the alliteration there. Saved some and saved some part. Let's try to understand how to find the rhyme scheme. And in order to find the rhyme scheme, we need to look at the rhyming words. You all are familiar with rhyming words. Let's try to look at the first stanza. Okay, the last word is crow and the next one is me. So crow has a different sound and me has a different sound. So for crow we write here A, right? And me has a different sound, so we'll write here B. And snow again rhymes with crow, snow, crow. So we had written A, so here we'll write A again. Tree, tree rhymes with me, so tree and me. So for me we had written B, so here for tree again we'll write B. So the rhyme scheme of the first stanza would be AB, AB, right? Now let's go to the next stanza. Okay, heart, mode, part, rude. Here heart and part rhyme with each other. Mood and rude rhyme with each other. So here we had written AB, AB. So here for heart we will use C, and for mood we will use D. Again part C, and rude will be D, because for the first 4 lines we had used A and B. So for the next lines we'll go C and D. Okay. So has given my heart. Heart has got a different sound than the words that have been used here in the first stanza. That is here crow, snow, me and tree. So here again a new sound has occurred. So we have written C there, and mood D. Heart and part rhyme, so we have written C for it again, and mood and rude both of them rhyme, so we have written D. So CD, CD, right? So the rhyme scheme of the entire poem would be here AB, AB, CD, CD, right? So this is the rhyme scheme of the poem. Let's now move on to the second poem written by Robert Frost again, Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I have tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. Now let's try to look at the word meanings. Desire means a strong feeling of wanting to have something or wishing for something to happen. Favor, approval or support. Now here in this poem, the poet has used fire and ice as two agents again of nature to compare it to the human life. Here he has compared them with the destructive human emotions of desire and hatred. So in the first stanza, the poet puts forth the opinions of people. One group of people are of the opinion that the world is going to end. Okay, people believe that the world is going to end. Okay, so some believe that the world is going to end in fire. That means fire is going to be the cause of the destruction of the world or the end of the world. And some believe that ice would bring an end to the earth, right, or to the world. Now in the first stanza, the poet is trying to talk of desire, his experience of desire. As I told you, he is comparing the destructive human emotions to the agents of nature, right? We know that fire is also destructive, and desire which human beings have, so both are dangerous. Having desire is not bad. To desire something is not bad, but too much of expectations, endless desires, when our desires never end and we are not satisfied with what we have, and the list of our desires go on and on and on, then what will happen? It will definitely take us towards destruction. More of desire means what? More of greed. We should be happy with whatever we have. When we are not happy or we are not content, then we desire more. And when we desire more, then our expectations also becomes more. And the more we expect, the more our desires and the more our greed, and which will lead us to nothing but destruction. So here the poet talks about our desires and compares desire to fire. Both of them rhyme also, isn't it? Fire and desire, both are destructive. So he says that in that case he agrees to the opinion of the people that the world would end in fire, if we talk in sense of our desires. Let's now move to the second stanza. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. Let's look at the word meanings. Perish means to die or to get exhausted or to finish. Suffice means be sufficient. Okay, it's enough, like to be enough. Now let's try to understand the second stanza. Here the poet is saying that if the world has to end twice, okay, if the world has to perish, that means come to an end twice, then he's talking of hatred here. In the first stanza he spoke of desire, now in the second stanza he is talking of hatred, and he is comparing hatred to ice. And he says it is not that only fire can bring the earth to an or the world to an end, but ice is also equally sufficient, and it could also bring the earth or the world to an end, just like a fire would do. So he's comparing eyes to hatred, which we human beings have. And though he says slow and steady, ice, we generally think that ice is so cool, it brings coolness and freshness, okay, but he has compared it to hatred, because many times what happens, children, if there is hatred in our heart or in our mind, many times it doesn't appear on the face. Then comes the irony, we have something else in our heart and we try to act something else. So here he's saying hatred also slowly will lead us towards destruction. If we possess hatred in us, if we hate people, so is it a good quality, children? No. So hatred will make us more destructive, and we'll have more of negative thoughts, and we'll always try to do something harmful for the person whom we hate, and that itself will destroy our inner self. So hatred will also destroy us. So here eyes also slowly could be the cause of the end of the world. So he says eyes would also be enough to destroy the world. So here, children, if we try to understand what the poet is trying to tell us, is the destructive emotions that we possess, we need to get rid of them, right, in order to save us from going towards destruction. Okay, he has taken example of the fire and the ice to give us this message. So I hope you have understood this poem. Now let's move towards the literary devices. Let's look at the literary devices. Rhyme scheme. A, B, A, and B, C, B, C, B. I have taught you how to find out the rhyme scheme. So children, go through the poem in your book and try to identify the rhyme scheme by looking at the rhyming words. Alliteration. As I told you, alliteration is the repetition of a consonant sound at the start of two or more closely placed words. Here, the sound of f has been repeated in favor, fire, favor, fire, and the sound v in world, will. Okay, so these are the alliterations in the poem. Now imagery. Imagery we had discussed, the words which create images in our mind. So here, some say the world will end in fire. So the image of fire, would come in our mind. Now that how the fire is going to spread fast and how everything is going to be destroyed, that image comes to our mind. For example, when we talk of the forest fires, the image comes to our mind. And to say that for destruction, ice is also great. Now the picture of cold countries or would come to our mind, that how ice is going to bring about destruction. So the picture of fire, the picture of ice would be in our mind. So that is the imagery. Anaphora. Children, this poetic device we haven't discussed, so let me tell you what is anaphora. It is the repetition of a word or expression at the start of two or more consecutive lines. For example, some say is repeated at the start of lines 1 and 2. Some say the world would end in fire, some say it would end in ice. So both the lines begin with the same phrase, some say. So when a particular word or a phrase is repeated in 2 or 3 consecutive lines, one after the another, it is known as anaphora. So here some say has been repeated in lines 1 and 2. So that is the poetic device here. Personification. Personification is to give human qualities to inanimate objects. So in the poem, fire and ice are capable of destruction. So the poet personifies the fire and the ice by giving them mind and power to destroy. Right? So the personification here is fire and ice. So I hope you have understood the second poem also by Robert Frost and what message the poet is trying to give us. And we have also discussed the poetic devices. So I would request you to go through the poems again, both the poems, and keep a pencil with you while you are reading your book and try to note down the rhyme scheme and the poetic devices and write it down there in the book, maybe in front of the sentence alliteration. You may underline the alliteration and write down there in front of the line alliteration, so that when you are revising the poems, so everything comes to your mind. You are able to look everything at a glance, the poetic device and the rhyme scheme, everything is clear to you whenever you want to revise the poems. And the questions that could be asked from this poem would be also again, how the agents of nature, ice and fire, has been compared to hatred and desire. Okay, or maybe according to the poet, how would the world come to an end with fire? Or how would the world come to an end with ice? Okay, and how the poet has compared them to human emotions. So what is the inner meaning, or what is the theme of the poem, what the poet is trying to convey? So we need to understand that so that we are able to answer any questions. Also, any questions could be asked about the use of poetic device. And children, you must also remember the name of the poem and the poet of all the poems which are there in your syllabus. So in the next class, we'll meet with some other topic. Until then, take care, stay safe, stay at home.